Victoria Whitmore grabbed the reserved placard and threw it like trash across the floor. Security! Her voice sliced through the crowded gala. We have a situation here. Someone is pretending he belongs with civilized people. The man in the navy suit didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, calm eyes, dignified silence, while phones came out recording laughing. People like you don't get tables like this, Victoria spat. You get the back alley with the garbage bags. What none of them knew, in exactly 60 minutes, this couple would be on their knees begging. And the man they just humiliated, he held their entire future in his hands. Comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The reserved placard hit the marble floor with a soft clatter. James Carter watched it spin twice before settling face down at his feet. Gold lettering on black cardstock. His name, his table, his seat. Victoria Whitmore didn't even look at where it landed. She'd already turned back to her phone, scrolling through Instagram like she hadn't just thrown a man's dignity across the room. Excuse me. James kept his voice level. I believe that's mine. Victoria's head snapped up. Her eyes traveled from his face down to his shoes, slow, deliberate, calculating the worth of every thread. Her lip curled. Yours? She laughed, sharp, cutting. Honey people like you don't get tables like this. Victoria. Her husband Bradford turned from the conversation he'd been having with a silver-haired banker. His face hardened the moment he saw James. What's going on? This man, Victoria gestured like she was pointing at a stain, claims this is his table. Bradford set down his champagne. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Old money. You could smell it on him. Are you deaf or just stupid? Bradford stepped closer. This table is for investors. Real money. Not whatever welfare check brought you here. James felt his jaw tighten. But he'd learned long ago that anger was a luxury men like him couldn't afford in rooms like this. One wrong word, one raised voice, and he'd become exactly what they expected. I'm James Carter, he said quietly. Horizon Capital Partners. That placard on the floor, it has my name on it. Victoria laughed again, louder this time, for the audience that was beginning to gather. James Carter is our investor, she said. We're meeting him Monday, for $50 million. She looked James up and down again. You're not him. I can show you my invitation. Don't. Bradford held up a hand. Don't reach for anything. Don't move. I'm just trying to... I said don't move. James froze. He knew what this was. He'd seen it before, the subtle shift, the way Bradford's voice rose just enough to attract attention, the way Victoria positioned herself like a victim. Security! Victoria's voice cut across the terrace. We have a situation here. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. A woman in a red dress pulled out her phone and started recording. Someone is pretending he belongs with civilized people, Victoria announced to no one and everyone. Can you believe this? They'll let anyone walk in off the street now. A security guard approached, middle-aged, uncomfortable, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. What's the problem here? This man. Victoria pointed at James like he was contaminated. He's harassing us, claiming he's some investor. It's pathetic. He won't leave, Bradford added. And he keeps reaching into his jacket. Who knows what he's got in there? The guard looked at James. Sir, do you have an invitation? James reached slowly, very slowly, into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the embossed card. Cream-colored, gold lettering. His name printed clearly. I'm James Carter, Horizon Capital Partners. This table is reserved for me. The guard studied the invitation, his brow furrowed. This looks legit. Of course it looks legit, Victoria snapped. That's what makes it a good fake. You can print anything these days. Ma'am, I don't care what you think. Victoria stood up. I care what you do. Remove him. Now. Or do we need to call the real police? The guard shifted his weight. He looked at James, then at the Whitmores, then at the growing crowd of onlookers. "Sir," he said finally, "maybe it's best if you just come with me. We can sort this out in the office." James met the guard's eyes. He saw it there, the apology, the shame. The man was just doing his job, following the path of least resistance, taking the side of the people who looked like they belonged. "All right," James said softly. "I'll step aside." Finally, Victoria sat back down in his chair, and smoothed her dress like she'd won a war. "You have to be firm with these people. Otherwise they walk all over you." Bradford settled in beside her. He raised his champagne glass toward a man 3 tables over. "Henderson, did you see that we just secured the best seats in the house?" Henderson looked away. James turned to follow the security guard. But before he could take a step, a young woman with a clipboard rushed over. The event coordinator. Her face was pale. "Wait," she said. "Wait, please." Victoria rolled her eyes. Now what? The coordinator was looking at her tablet, then at James, then back at her tablet. Her hands were shaking. "Ma'am," she said to Victoria, "I need to tell you something. Can it wait? We're trying to enjoy the evening." "No." The coordinator swallowed hard. "It really can't." Bradford turned around annoyed. "What is it?" The coordinator took a breath. She looked at James one more time, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Respect. Recognition. "This man," she said slowly, "is James Carter." "We know who he claims to be," Victoria said, "and we know he's lying." "He's not lying." The coordinator's voice was stronger now. "He's our keynote sponsor." Silence. "He donated $2.5 million to this event." The silence deepened. "He's the reason any of us are here tonight." Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Bradford's face went gray. "That's impossible," Victoria whispered. "James Carter he's supposed to be..." "What?" James spoke for the first time since the guard had arrived. His voice was quiet, controlled. "What is James Carter supposed to be?" Victoria couldn't answer. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "White," James continued. "Is that what you mean, James Carter is supposed to be white?" "I didn't. Or maybe you expected a hoodie and jeans, some Silicon Valley stereotype. Anyone except a black man in a nice suit who takes the subway and doesn't flash designer labels." "Mr. Carter," Bradford started. "We had no idea." "You had no idea who I was," James said. "But you knew what you saw, and you decided that what you saw didn't belong here." He bent down and picked up the placard from the floor. He wiped it off with his sleeve and set it carefully on the table. "This is my seat," he said. "And Monday morning, that meeting you mentioned." Bradford's face went from gray to white. "It's canceled." James straightened his jacket. "Horizon Capital won't be investing in Whitmore Enterprises. Not 50 million, not 50 cents. "Please." Victoria's voice cracked. "Please, we can explain." "You already did." James looked around at the watching crowd, the recording phones, the shocked faces. "You explained everything." He turned to the coordinator. "Ellen, I believe I have a speech to give." Ellen nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. 8:30, 15 minutes. "Perfect." James started walking toward the stage. Then he paused and looked back at the Whitmores. "You might want to stay," he said. "You'll want to hear this." Victoria couldn't breathe. She sat in the stolen chair, his chair, and felt the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed, then again, then again. "Brad?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Brad, look at your phone." Bradford was already looking. His face had gone from white to something closer to green. "We're on Twitter," he said. "I know." "There's a video." "I know." "Victoria, there's a video of you saying, I know. She grabbed her own phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. 73 notifications. No 87 now. Still climbing. The top tweet had been shared 400 times. The video was 15 seconds long. Her voice crystal clear. People like you don't get tables like this. You get the back alley with the garbage bags. Comments loaded beneath it. Absolutely vile behavior. This is what racism looks like in expensive dresses. Hope they lose everything. Victoria looked around the terrace. Every table had gone quiet. Every eye was on them. Some people weren't even pretending to hide their disgust. We need to leave, Bradford said. No. Victoria, we're not running. She lifted her chin. We didn't do anything wrong. That man was obviously trying to scam his way in. We were protecting everyone here. Victoria, listen to me. Bradford leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. Do you understand what just happened? That man we just humiliated in front of 200 people controls whether our company survives. He was lying. He wasn't lying. Bradford grabbed her arm. Don't you get it? He's real. James Carter is real. And we just told him he belongs in an alley with garbage. Victoria's phone buzzed again. Her mother. Call me immediately. What have you done? Her sister. Mom is crying. What's wrong with you? Her best friend Melissa. Please tell me that video isn't real. It was real. Every word, every sneer, every moment of cruelty captured in high definition and spreading across the internet like wildfire. We should apologize, Victoria said. Find him before his speech. Explain that it was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Bradford laughed bitter hollow. There's nothing to misunderstand. You threw his name card on the floor and told him to find the garbage. You called him stupid. Because I thought... You thought what? That black men can't be billionaires, that anyone who doesn't wear a Rolex must be a criminal. Keep your voice down. Why, everyone's already watching. They were. The woman at the next table had moved to a different seat. The man Bradford had called Henderson wouldn't even look in their direction. A waiter approached, hesitated, then walked away without offering to refill their glasses. Bradford's phone rang. He looked at the screen and went pale. Who is it? The board chairman. Don't answer. I have to answer. He pressed the phone to his ear. Hello? Yes, I saw it. It's being taken out of context. I understand that, but... He listened. His shoulders sagged. Yes. Monday morning. I'll be there. He hung up. What did he say? Emergency board meeting. Before our investor pitch. Bradford stared at his phone like it might bite him. Which doesn't matter anymore because we don't have an investor pitch. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. For the first time since this nightmare began, she truly understood what she'd done. $50 million, she whispered. Gone. Our company. I don't know. Bradford's voice cracked. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we can survive this. A sound system crackled to life. The event coordinator's voice echoed across the terrace. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll begin our program shortly. Victoria grabbed Bradford's arm. We have to go. Now. Before he... And now, Ellen continued, I have the profound honor of introducing our evening's keynote sponsor. Too late. A man whose generosity has transformed thousands of lives. Victoria watched as James Carter walked toward the stage. His steps were measured, confident, dignified. He passed directly by their table without even glancing at them. A visionary whose work speaks louder than words. The room erupted in applause. People stood. Some of them were looking at James with admiration. Others were looking at the Whitmores with contempt. A man who just minutes ago was told he didn't belong here. The applause grew louder. Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Horizon Capital Partners, Mr. James Carter. James took the microphone. The room fell silent, hundreds of people holding their breath, waiting to see what he would do. He smiled, small, controlled, sad. Thank you, Ellen. His voice was calm, steady, and thank you all for being here tonight. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I want to talk about what happened earlier, because it matters, because it's exactly why this cause exists. Victoria felt Bradford's hand close around hers. Neither of them moved. About 20 minutes ago, James continued, I approached my reserved table, that table right there, and I was told I didn't belong. Every head turned toward the Whitmores. Not because I lacked an invitation, not because I hadn't donated, but because of how I look. Victoria wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink through the floor and vanish. I was told to find my people in the kitchen. I was told that people like me belong in back alleys with garbage bags. I was told I was probably here to scam rich people with a fake invitation. The silence was suffocating. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat. The couple who said those things is sitting at my table right now, in my seat. She couldn't look up. She couldn't face the hundreds of eyes boring into her. Here's the interesting part. James's voice never rose, never hardened. That couple has a meeting scheduled with me Monday morning, about a $50 million investment in their company. Gasps rippled through the crowd. James corrected himself. They had a meeting. Past tense. Bradford made a sound something between a groan and a sob. Because I don't invest in people who see other human beings as less than human. I don't build partnerships with people who use their privilege as a weapon. James looked directly at them for the first time. I don't do business with racists. The room exploded. Applause cheers people on their feet. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. Bradford had buried his head in his hands. But James wasn't finished. Some of you are wondering if I'm being too harsh, if maybe it was just a misunderstanding. He shook his head. It wasn't. You all heard what was said. Many of you recorded it. Those words weren't accidental. They weren't a mistake. They revealed a worldview. He turned back to the broader audience. But tonight isn't about them. It's not about me either. Tonight is about 10,000 students who will receive STEM scholarships because of your generosity. It's about breaking real barriers, not perpetuating old ones. The applause was gentler now, more respectful. So please. James gestured toward the room. Don't let this moment distract from the real work. Let it teach us. Let it remind us to see people, not assumptions, not stereotypes. People. He set the microphone back in its stand and walked off the stage. The coordinator appeared at the Whitmore's table within seconds. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. Her voice was ice. You need to leave, immediately. Please, Victoria sobbed. We didn't know. We didn't. Security will escort you out. 2 guards materialized. The same middle-aged man from earlier, plus a younger colleague with a face like stone. Bradford stood on shaking legs. Can't we need to apologize. You need to leave. You're no longer welcome here. The walk to the elevator lasted forever. Every table they passed fell silent. Every face turned away. People pulled back their chairs like the Whitmores were contagious. A man Bradford had known for 20 years, golf partner, business contact, someone he'd called a friend, turned his entire chair around so he wouldn't have to look at them. Victoria's sobs echoed off the marble walls. When the elevator doors finally opened, she collapsed against the wall. What have we done? She could barely get the words out. Oh God, Brad, what have we done? Bradford didn't answer. He was staring at his reflection in the polished doors. He didn't recognize the man looking back. The elevator began its descent. 60 floors. Each one felt like a year. At the bottom, Cameras flashed. News crews had already arrived. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Whitmore, do you have a comment on the video?" "Mrs. Whitmore, do you regret your words?" "Is it true you lost a $50 million investment?" Bradford pushed through the crowd, dragging Victoria behind him. They reached their car somehow. He drove without speaking. She cried the entire way home. Their phones kept buzzing. Emails, texts, calls, all marked urgent. Neither of them looked, because they already knew. In 30 seconds of cruelty, 30 seconds of assumptions and contempt, they had lost everything. And the man they'd humiliated hadn't even raised his voice. That night, James Carter stood alone in his corner office. The city glittered below him, a million lights, a million stories. His phone showed 47 missed calls, interview requests, board members, old friends who'd seen the video. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. A woman in a simple dress, smiling at the camera. His mother. She'd died 3 years ago. Never saw his success. Never sat in this office. Never knew her son would become one of the most powerful investors in the country. But she'd taught him everything that mattered. "See the person, Jamie," she used to say. "Not their job, not their money, not their skin. See the person." Tonight he'd been seen. Finally. Completely. Not by the Whitmores, they'd looked right through him, but by everyone else. By the teenagers who'd watched the video and recognized their own experiences. By the cleaning staff and bus drivers and single mothers who'd been told they didn't belong. James set the photograph back in the drawer. Tomorrow, the lawsuits would start, the investigations, the endless media cycle. The Whitmores would face consequences they couldn't imagine. But tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And truth once spoken couldn't be unheard. James turned off the light and went home. He had a lot of work to do. The sun rose over Manhattan like it did every other morning, indifferent to the lives it illuminated. But for Bradford and Victoria Whitmore, nothing would ever be the same. Bradford hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his study watching the numbers climb. The video had been shared 12,000 times by midnight. By 3 a.m., it hit 50,000. When the first light crept through the windows, it had crossed 200,000 and showed no signs of slowing. Victoria found him there at 6 a.m., still in his tuxedo, an empty bottle of scotch on the desk. "Have you been here all night?" He didn't look up. "Read the comments, Victoria. Read what they're saying about us." She didn't want to. She'd made that mistake at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, and thought maybe, just maybe, some people would understand. Some people would see their side. They didn't. "We need a lawyer," she said. "A crisis management team. Something." "I called Richard Hastings at 5 a.m. And..." Bradford finally looked at her. His eyes were red, bloodshot, hollow. "He's not taking us as clients. Said it would be a conflict of interest." "What conflict?" "His firm represents 3 companies that do business with Horizon Capital. He can't be seen defending us against James Carter." Victoria sank into the leather chair across from him. "Then we find someone else." "I called 4 firms, Victoria. 4. 2 didn't answer. 1 said they'd call back and didn't. The 4th said their client roster was full. At 5 a.m. At 5 a.m. Bradford laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Amazing how fast word travels, isn't it? We're toxic. Nobody wants to touch us." Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. "It's my mother. Again." "Don't answer." "She's called 11 times." "I know. My brother's called 8. Bradford rubbed his eyes. "The board chairman called at 4 a.m. Do you know what he said?" Victoria shook her head. "He said, 'Bradford, I've known your family for 30 years. Your grandfather built something remarkable, and you destroyed it in 30 seconds. The words hung in the air between them. "What did you say?" "Nothing. What could I say?" Bradford stood up, steadying himself on the desk. I need to shower. The emergency board meeting is at 7. I'm coming with you. No. His voice was sharp. You're not. They specifically asked that you not attend. Victoria felt like she'd been slapped. They can't do that. I'm your wife. They can do whatever they want. And right now they want you as far away from Whitmore Enterprises as possible. He paused at the door. They're afraid, Victoria. Afraid that if you show up, you'll make things worse. Make things worse? How could things possibly get worse? Bradford didn't answer. He just walked out, leaving her alone with the empty bottle and the rising sun. 2 hours later, Bradford sat at the end of a long conference table. 12 board members stared at him like he was a stranger. These were people he'd known for years, golfed with, dined with, celebrated holidays with. None of them would meet his eyes. The chairman, a man named Walter Drummond, who'd served on the board since Bradford's father's time, opened a folder. Let's begin. Walter. Before we start, I want to say, you'll have your chance to speak, Bradford, but first I need to present the facts. Walter's voice was cold, professional. As of 6 a.m. this morning, the video from last night's gala has been viewed over 300,000 times. It's been covered by CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and every major newspaper in the country. Bradford felt sick. Our stock price opened down 41%. Trading was halted twice to prevent further collapse. 41%, Bradford whispered. That's not all. Walter slid a document across the table. Peterson Manufacturing called at 6:30. They're terminating their contract, effective immediately. Peterson? We've worked with them for 15 years. They don't want to work with us anymore. Walter slid another document. Tech Flow Solutions. Same story. And Riverside Industrial called 20 minutes ago. They're reviewing their partnership, which we all know means they're gone too. Bradford stared at the documents. 3 contracts. $18 million in annual revenue. Gone. The EEOC called this morning, another board member said. A woman named Patricia, who'd always been friendly to Bradford at company events. Now her face was stone. They're opening a formal investigation into discriminatory practices at Whitmore Enterprises. Discriminatory practices based on what? Based on the video, and based on. Patricia glanced at Walter. Other things. What other things? Walter pulled out another folder. This one was thicker. We've received 7 complaints this morning. Former employees, all people of color, all claiming they were discriminated against, harassed, or wrongfully terminated. Bradford's mouth went dry. Those complaints were settled. NDAs were signed. Yes, they were. With company money. Money the board was never informed about. Walter's voice hardened. $1.2 million in settlements over the past 5 years. All buried in legal expenses. All hidden from oversight. The room went silent. Bradford, Walter said slowly, did you think we wouldn't find out? Those situations were complicated. The employees were difficult. The complaints were exaggerated. Were they? Patricia leaned forward. Maria Gonzalez was fired 3 days after reporting racial slurs. David Chen was passed over for promotion 4 times despite perfect reviews. Jamal Williams was let go after his supervisor called him boy repeatedly. Those are their versions of events. Those are the documented versions of events, from HR files. Files that were supposed to be confidential, but are now being reviewed by our legal team. Patricia shook her head. This isn't just about one video, Bradford. This is about a pattern, a culture, a company that paid people to stay silent about how they were treated. Bradford looked around the table. 12 faces. 12 people who'd trusted him to lead. 12 people who now looked at him like he was a disease. What do you want from me? Walter closed the folder. Your resignation as CEO, effective immediately. You can't. We can, and we are. Walter stood up. You'll retain a seat on the board for now, but you'll have zero operational authority. All decisions will go through an interim CEO until a permanent replacement is found. My family built this company. Your family built it. You're destroying it. Walter walked toward the door. The vote was unanimous, Bradford. Every single person in this room agreed. That should tell you something. The other board members filed out one by one. None of them said goodbye. None of them offered sympathy. They just left like Bradford was already gone. He sat alone in the empty conference room for a long time. When he finally walked out, his assistant was waiting. She'd worked for him for 8 years. Now she couldn't look at him. Mr. Whitmore, there are reporters in the lobby. How many? About 30, and more outside. Bradford felt his chest tighten. Is there a back exit? Yes, sir. I can show you. He followed her through hallways he'd walked 1,000 times. Past offices where people were packing boxes. 3 employees had already resigned. She told him not wanting to be associated with the company anymore. The back exit led to an alley. A literal alley behind the building next to the dumpsters. The irony wasn't lost on him. Across town, Victoria faced her own reckoning. The country club had called at 8 a.m., not to offer support, not to check on her, to inform her that an emergency meeting of the membership committee had been scheduled for Thursday. What kind of meeting? Victoria had asked. Regarding your continued membership status, Mrs. Whitmore. She'd hung up without responding. Now she sat in her dressing room surrounded by designer clothes and expensive jewelry and felt like she was suffocating. Her phone had stopped buzzing around 9 a.m., not because people had stopped messaging, but because she'd turned it off. The doorbell rang at 10. Victoria ignored it. It rang again. Then someone started knocking. Victoria! Victoria! I know you're in there. She recognized the voice. Diane Morrison, her best friend for 20 years, co-chair of 3 charity boards, the woman who'd introduced her to Bradford at a garden party in the Hamptons. Victoria opened the door. Diane stood on the porch, perfectly dressed as always, but her face was tight with something Victoria had never seen before. Disgust. Real, undisguised disgust. I came to get my things. Your things. The Hermes scarf I lent you last month. The earrings you borrowed for the Hendersons' party. I want them back. Victoria felt something cold settle in her chest. Diane, please, come inside. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. Diane pushed past her into the foyer. I watched the video, Victoria. I watched you tell a man he belongs with garbage. I watched you call security on someone whose only crime was being black at a fancy party. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I saw it. Everyone saw it. We didn't know who he was. Diane stopped. She turned slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet. Dangerous. That's the problem, Victoria. You didn't know who he was. He could have been anyone. A janitor, a teacher, a bus driver, and you would have treated him exactly the same way. That's not... It is. It absolutely is. Diane shook her head. I've known you for 20 years. We've served on boards together. We've raised money together. We've called each other friends. She paused. But I've also watched you. The way you talk to waiters. The way you treat people you think are beneath you. I told myself it wasn't that bad. That you were just... particular. Victoria's throat tightened. Diane... I was wrong. I was making excuses for you. And I'm done. She walked to the living room, picked up a scarf from the back of a chair, grabbed a pair of earrings from a decorative dish. Diane, please. We've been friends for... We were never friends, Victoria. I see that now. You don't have friends. You have accessories. People who make you look good, who validate your lifestyle, who pretend not to notice when you're cruel. She walked back toward the door. I'm not going to be that person anymore. You can't just abandon me. Not now. Not when... When what? When there are consequences. Diane opened the door. I'm not abandoning you, Victoria. I'm protecting myself, my reputation, my family. Your reputation? My daughter is applying to college next year. Do you think I want admissions officers seeing pictures of me with you? Do you think I want to explain why my friend thinks black men belong in alleys? The door slammed. Victoria stood in the empty foyer, listening to Diane's car pull away. The phone rang. The landline, this time one of the few numbers she hadn't turned off. She answered without thinking. Hello. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Angela Chen from CNN. I'm hoping to get your comment on... Victoria hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. Mrs. Whitmore, this is... She yanked the cord from the wall. Silence. Finally silence. But the silence was worse, because in the silence she could hear her own voice playing on repeat in her mind. People like you don't get tables like this. You get the back alley with the garbage bags. Someone is pretending he belongs with civilized people. Had she really said those things? Had those words really come out of her mouth? She walked to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror, the same face she'd seen every day for 53 years. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same bone structure her mother had always been so proud of. But something was different now. Something in her expression. Something she'd never noticed before. She looked ugly. Not physically, not on the surface, but underneath. Something rotten showing through. Victoria sank to the floor and cried. At 2 p.m., Bradford finally made it home. He'd spent 3 hours driving around the city, unable to face his own house, his own wife, his own failure. Victoria was in the living room when he walked in. Her eyes were red. Her makeup was ruined. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. The board meeting? She asked. I'm out. They removed me as CEO. Victoria didn't react. Maybe she'd run out of reactions. Diane came by, she said. And, she's not our friend anymore. She took her scarf back. Bradford almost laughed. Her scarf. 20 years of friendship and it comes down to a scarf. It comes down to a video. Victoria looked at him. Brad, what are we going to do? I don't know. We could apologize, publicly, on television. And say what? That we're sorry we got caught, that we're sorry people recorded us. No one will believe we're actually sorry. Are we? The question hung in the air. Are we actually sorry? Victoria repeated. For what we said, or just for what happened after? Bradford didn't answer, because he didn't know. He'd spent all day trying to figure out what he felt, and all he'd found was anger. Anger at James Carter for humiliating them. Anger at the people who recorded the video. Anger at the board for forcing him out. But guilt, remorse. Actual regret for the words themselves. He wasn't sure. There's something else, Victoria said quietly. While you were gone, I got an email from Sarah Chen, CFO of Horizon Capital. Bradford's stomach dropped. What did it say? Victoria pulled out her phone and read aloud. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Carter wanted you to know that Horizon Capital has completed its due diligence on Whitmore Enterprises. We found a pattern of discrimination that goes far beyond one video. 7 former employees with similar stories. $1.2 million in settlements. All buried, all silenced. They can't know about that. They do know about it, Brad. They know everything. Victoria continued reading. Mr. Carter has forwarded these findings to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. An investigation will begin immediately. Bradford felt the floor shift beneath him. This can't be happening. Additionally, Victoria read, Mr. Carter wanted me to inform you that he'll be discussing these findings in his interview with Anderson Cooper tomorrow evening. Anderson Cooper. Prime time. Millions of viewers. Victoria set down the phone. He's not just walking away from the deal, Brad. He's making sure everyone knows why. Bradford sank into the nearest chair. His mind was spinning, trying to calculate damage, trying to find an escape route, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. 24 hours ago, he'd been one of the most respected businessmen in the city. He had a company, a reputation, a social circle that included senators and CEOs. He had a meeting scheduled with one of the most powerful investors in the country. Now he had nothing. All because of one man, one black man in a navy suit who'd had the audacity to show up at a charity gala and claim his own seat. "He ruined us," Bradford said. "Carter. He destroyed everything we built." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was strange, hollow, different. "No," she said. "We destroyed it. He just let everyone watch." Bradford wanted to argue, wanted to blame someone else, Carter, the media, the board, anyone but himself. But looking at his wife's face, at the devastation there, the recognition of something she'd been avoiding her whole life, he couldn't find the words. Because maybe, just maybe, she was right. That night, James Carter sat in his office reviewing documents by lamplight. Sarah had sent over everything, every complaint, every settlement, every buried accusation. 7 employees. 7 lives derailed by prejudice. 7 people who'd been paid to stay silent while the Whitmores continued building their empire on other people's pain. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. "Tomorrow's interview is confirmed. Anderson Cooper, 8 p.m. They want a full hour." James set down the phone. He didn't want to be on television, didn't want to be famous, didn't want any of this. But he thought about Maria Gonzalez fired for reporting slurs, about David Chen passed over again and again, about Jamal Williams called boy by his supervisor while HR looked the other way. They didn't have platforms, they didn't have power. They'd signed NDAs and taken settlements because they had no other choice. James had a choice. He could stay quiet, let the video speak for itself, let the Whitmores fade into obscurity. Or he could use his voice for the people who'd been silenced. He picked up the phone and texted back. "Confirmed. Make sure we have time to discuss the former employees. Their stories deserve to be heard." He put the phone away and looked out at the city. Tomorrow, the Whitmores would face another round of consequences. More contracts lost. More friends abandoning them. More of their carefully constructed world crumbling. But this wasn't about revenge. It had never been about revenge. It was about truth. About accountability. About making sure that what happened to him, what happened to Maria and David and Jamal and countless others would be harder to ignore. Because the Whitmores weren't unique. There were thousands like them in boardrooms and country clubs across the country, treating people like garbage and never facing consequences. Not anymore. James turned off the lamp and headed home. Tomorrow would be a long day. The Anderson Cooper interview aired at 8 p.m. on a Thursday night. 12 million people watched. James Carter sat across from one of the most respected journalists in America wearing the same navy suit from the gala. He'd chosen it deliberately. A reminder. A statement. "Mr. Carter," Anderson began, "the video has been viewed over 15 million times. You've become, whether you intended to or not, a symbol. How does that feel?" James considered the question carefully. "Uncomfortable, honestly. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to attend a charity event and support a cause I believe in. But what happened that night has sparked a national conversation about racism, privilege, and accountability. Do you think that conversation is necessary? I think it's long overdue." James leaned forward slightly. "What happened to me happens every single day to people who don't have the platform I have, people who can't fight back, people who get humiliated in silence and have to swallow it because they need their jobs, their reputations, their peace." "You're referring to the former Whitmore Enterprises employees." "I am." Anderson shuffled his notes. "Your team uncovered 7 former employees who claim they experienced discrimination at Whitmore Enterprises. All of them signed NDAs. All of them were paid settlements. Can you tell us more about what you found?" James nodded slowly. "These were people who worked hard, who showed up every day, who did everything right, and they were pushed out not because of their performance, but because of who they were." Can you give us specifics? Maria Gonzalez was a warehouse supervisor. Excellent record. She reported that coworkers were using racial slurs. 3 days later, she was terminated for performance issues that had never been documented before. Anderson's expression tightened. 3 days. 3 days. She was paid $200,000 to sign an NDA and disappear quietly. And the others? David Chen was passed over for promotion 4 times. His performance reviews were the highest in his department. When he filed an internal complaint, he was told the promotions went to people who were a better cultural fit. James paused. He resigned 2 weeks later, $150,000 to stay silent. Cultural fit. That's what they called it. Cultural fit. James's voice hardened slightly. We both know what that really means. Anderson nodded. There's another case that's gotten a lot of attention. Jamal Williams. James's jaw tightened. Jamal worked in operations. His direct supervisor called him boy repeatedly. In meetings. In emails. In front of other employees. And HR did nothing. HR documented the complaints. Then they documented Jamal's sudden attitude problems. Then they let him go. James looked directly into the camera. The supervisor kept his job, got promoted actually. Jamal got $225,000 and a piece of paper that said he could never talk about what happened. Anderson let the silence stretch before continuing. The Whitmore's attorneys have released a statement saying these settlements were standard business practice and don't represent an admission of wrongdoing. Of course they'd say that. But I'd ask anyone watching if these employees did nothing wrong, why pay them over $1 million to stay quiet? If the company did nothing wrong, why hide these settlements from the board? You believe there was a cover-up. I believe there was a culture where certain people were valued and certain people weren't, where complaints got buried and accusers got pushed out, where money solved problems that should have been solved by decency. Anderson leaned back. Let's talk about that night at the gala. You could have revealed who you were immediately. You could have called for backup, shown your credentials demanded respect. Why didn't you? James was quiet for a moment. Because I wanted to see what would happen when they thought I was nobody. And what did you learn? That I wasn't a person to them. I was an inconvenience, a threat, something to be removed. He paused. Mrs. Whitmore told me I belonged in an alley with garbage bags. Mr. Whitmore asked if I was deaf or stupid. They called security on me for standing near my own seat. Did that surprise you? No. James's voice was soft, sad. That's the part that breaks my heart, Anderson. It didn't surprise me at all. Because I've been that man my whole life. The one who gets followed in stores. The one who gets pulled over for driving a nice car. The one who gets asked if he's the help at every fancy event he attends. Even now, even with your success. Success doesn't change how people see you when they don't know your name. Success doesn't protect you from assumptions. James looked down at his hands. My mother cleaned offices at night. My father drove a bus. They taught me that my dignity wasn't dependent on my bank account, that I was worthy of respect no matter what. Your mother passed away a few years ago. She did. Cancer. James's voice caught slightly. She never got to see any of this. The company. The success. This interview. He smiled, small and bittersweet. She would have hated the attention, but she would have loved that I stood up. What would she have said about what happened? She would have said, see the person Jamie, not the job, not the money, the person. James looked back at the camera. That's what the Whitmores couldn't do. They couldn't see me as a person. They could only see what they expected to see. The interview continued for another 30 minutes. James talked about his foundation, his scholarship programs, his investments in companies led by women, and people of color. He talked about growing up poor, learning to code in a cramped library, earning his way into rooms that didn't want him. But the moment everyone remembered the moment that would be replayed millions of times came near the end. "One final question," Anderson said. "Do you forgive them, the Whitmores?" James thought for a long time. The silence stretched. Viewers held their breath. "Forgiveness is complicated," he finally said. "I don't wish them harm. I don't celebrate their downfall. But forgiveness isn't the same as absolution. They did what they did. They said what they said. And now they're facing consequences. Is that justice? I don't know if it's justice. Justice would mean this never happened in the first place. Justice would mean Maria Gonzalez never had to choose between her dignity and her livelihood. Justice would mean Jamal Williams never got called boy by someone who was supposed to lead him." James paused. "What's happening now isn't justice, it's accountability. And maybe if we're lucky, it's a start." The interview ended. The screen went black. Across the country, millions of people sat in silence thinking about what they'd just heard. In a darkened living room in Westchester, Bradford, and Victoria Whitmore sat frozen on their couch. Neither of them had moved for the entire hour. Neither of them had spoken. The television cast flickering shadows across their faces as the credits rolled. Victoria was the first to break the silence. "He knows everything." Bradford didn't respond. His hands were shaking. "The settlements, the complaints, Maria, David, Jamal." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "He knows all of it. I heard him. What are we going to do?" Bradford finally turned to look at her. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who'd just watched his own funeral. "There's nothing to do. It's over. It can't be over. We can fight this. We can—" "Fight what?" Bradford's voice cracked. "Fight the truth. Fight 7 people who've been waiting years to tell their stories." He laughed bitterly. "We paid them to be quiet, Victoria. We paid them, and we thought that was the end of it. We thought money could make it all go away. It should have. They signed NDAs. NDAs don't mean anything when the whole world already knows. NDAs don't mean anything when James Carter has an army of lawyers and unlimited resources and the moral high ground." Victoria started crying. She'd been crying off and on for 3 days now, but this was different. This was the crying of someone who'd finally understood that there was no way out. "I didn't mean it," she sobbed. "What I said at the gala, I didn't mean it." "Didn't you?" She looked at him shocked. "What?" Bradford's face was hard. "Didn't you mean it, Victoria? When you told him he belonged with garbage? When you called him uncivilized? When you threw his name card on the floor like it was trash? I was confused. I thought he was lying. You thought a black man couldn't possibly be someone important. You thought anyone who looked like him must be a scammer or a criminal or someone trying to take something that wasn't his. That's not fair." "It's exactly fair. It's what happened." Bradford stood up abruptly. "And the worst part, I thought the same thing. I looked at him, and I saw exactly what you saw. Someone who didn't belong. Someone beneath us." Victoria stared at him. "Brad? We're not good people, Victoria." His voice broke. "I've spent 3 days trying to figure out how to spin this, how to apologize, how to make it go away. But sitting here watching that interview, hearing those names, Maria, David, Jamal, I realized something." "What?" "They're not the only ones. They're not even close to the only ones." Bradford sank back into his chair. "Every employee we've ever dismissed, every person we've overlooked, every time we assumed someone was less than because of how they looked or where they came from." He covered his face with his hands. "We've done this our whole lives. We just never got caught before." Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, defend their life, defend everything they'd built. But the words wouldn't come, because she knew he was right. She thought about the cleaning lady she'd fired for being 5 minutes late. The gardener she'd accused of stealing when she'd simply misplaced her own jewelry. The countless waiters and service workers she'd snapped at, belittled, treated like they were invisible. She'd never thought of it as racism. She'd thought of it as standards, as expecting excellence, as refusing to tolerate mediocrity. But now, in the flickering light of the television, she saw it for what it was, and she hated what she saw. The phone rang. Bradford ignored it. It rang again. "It's probably another reporter," Victoria said. "I don't care." But the phone kept ringing. Finally, Bradford grabbed it. "What?" A woman's voice, professional and cold. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Angela Martinez from Hartwell and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of Maria Gonzalez, David Chen, Jamal Williams, and 4 other former employees of Whitmore Enterprises." Bradford's blood went cold. "I have nothing to say." "I'm not calling for a comment, Mr. Whitmore. I'm calling to inform you that we'll be filing a class action lawsuit tomorrow morning. 7 plaintiffs, $15 million in damages." "You can't do that. They signed NDAs." "The NDAs are void. They were signed under duress without adequate legal representation, and they failed to disclose the full scope of the discriminatory conduct. My clients are prepared to testify in open court about everything they experienced." Bradford couldn't breathe. "This is harassment. This is justice, Mr. Whitmore. Something your company should have provided years ago." The line went dead. Victoria was staring at him. "What is it? What did they say?" "Lawsuit, $15 million. Bradford set down the phone like it was made of glass. "They're filing tomorrow. We can fight it. We can—" "With what?" Bradford screamed. The sound echoed through the empty house. "With what money, Victoria? The company's hemorrhaging. The stock is worthless. Our accounts are frozen pending the investigation. We're broke." "We're not broke. We have this house. The house is mortgaged. Everything is mortgaged. I've been borrowing against assets for years to cover the settlements to maintain our lifestyle to keep up appearances." He laughed again, that horrible broken sound. "We've been living on borrowed money and borrowed time, and now it's all come due at once." Victoria sat in stunned silence. Everything. Gone. All of it. The house they'd raised their children in. The cars. The jewelry. The country club membership that was already revoked. The charity positions that were already surrendered. All gone. "What do we do?" she whispered. Bradford didn't answer. He just stared at the blank television screen, seeing his own reflection staring back. He didn't recognize the man he saw. The next morning, the lawsuit was front-page news. 7 former employees stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by reporters. Maria Gonzalez stepped up to the microphone. "For years, I was told to be quiet. I was told that speaking up would ruin my career, my reputation, my life." Her voice was steady, strong. "I signed a piece of paper that said I could never talk about what happened to me. And I believed that paper had more power than my truth." She looked directly into the cameras. "I was wrong. My truth matters. My experience matters. And today, I'm taking that truth back." The other 6 plaintiffs stood behind her, nodding. David Chen, Jamal Williams, 4 others whose names hadn't been known until now. They were teachers, engineers, managers, supervisors. They were mothers and fathers. They were people who'd worked hard and played by the rules and been pushed out anyway. "We're not doing this for the money," Maria continued. "We're doing this because what happened to us is still happening to other people, in other companies, in other boardrooms, and it has to stop." Questions erupted from the crowd. Maria answered them calmly, clearly. She talked about the slurs, the dismissals, the feeling of being invisible in her own workplace. When a reporter asked about James Carter, she smiled for the first time. "Mr. Carter reached out to us after the video went viral. He offered legal support, financial support, whatever we needed. He didn't have to do that. He didn't know us. But he saw what happened to him, and he knew it wasn't unique." "Do you think he's a hero?" Maria considered the question. I think he's a man who refused to be silent, and that gave the rest of us permission to refuse too. James watched the press conference from his office. Sarah stood beside him, arms crossed. "The Whitmore's lawyers are requesting a meeting," she said. "They want to discuss settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "They're offering $2 million to make it all go away. Full confidentiality for everyone." James laughed softly. $2 million. For 7 lives. For years of discrimination. I told them it was insulting. They said it was the best they could do given their financial situation. Their financial situation. James shook his head. Amazing how quickly fortunes change when the world sees who you really are. What do you want me to tell them? James was quiet for a moment. He watched Maria on the screen, watched her standing tall in front of the cameras, watched her refusing to be ashamed of what had been done to her. Tell them no deal. Tell them we'll see them in court. That could take years. I know. James turned away from the television. But some things are more important than quick resolutions. Maria and the others deserve their day. They deserve to be heard. Not in a back room with lawyers. In public. On the record. Sarah nodded. I'll let them know. She started to leave, then paused at the door. James, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. I hope so. He sat down heavily. I keep asking myself if this is justice or revenge, if I'm fighting for them or punishing the Whitmores. Does it matter? It matters to me. He looked at the photograph on his desk, his mother smiling in her church clothes. She taught me that vengeance corrupts, that anger is a poison, that you have to let go of hate or it consumes you. And have you let go? James thought about it. He thought about Victoria's face twisted with disgust. Bradford's voice dripping with contempt. The way they'd looked at him like he was less than nothing. I'm working on it, he said finally. Every day I'm working on it. That afternoon, 3 more Whitmore Enterprises employees came forward. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. Current employees this time. People who still worked at the company. People who'd been too afraid to speak until they saw their former colleagues standing on those courthouse steps. The EEOC investigation expanded. Federal investigators arrived at Whitmore headquarters, collecting documents, interviewing staff, building a case that grew larger by the hour. Bradford watched it all from his home office, the only room in the house that still felt like his. The company his grandfather had built being dismantled piece by piece. His phone rang. His attorney. Bradford, we need to talk about Chapter 11. Bankruptcy. It's our only option at this point. The lawsuit, the investigation, the collapsed contracts. There's no way to keep the company operational. Bradford closed his eyes. My grandfather started that company in 1952. 72 years. I know. But if we don't file for protection, you'll lose everything. The lawsuit alone will take every asset you have. We've already lost everything. Not everything. Chapter 11 allows restructuring. You might be able to save part of the business, rebuild over time. Rebuild, Bradford laughed. Who's going to work for us after this? Who's going to do business with us? Our name is poison. The attorney didn't argue, because they both knew it was true. I'll file the paperwork tomorrow, he said. I'm sorry, Bradford, I really am. The line went dead. Bradford sat in the silence of his office, surrounded by family photographs and awards and certificates of achievement. All meaningless now. All relics of a life that no longer existed. He picked up a photo from his desk. His father standing in front of the factory in 1975. Proud. Successful. A man who'd built something that mattered. What would his father say if he could see this Bradford didn't want to know? He set the photo face down and walked out of the room. That night, Victoria packed a suitcase. What are you doing? Bradford asked from the doorway. I'm going to my sister's in Connecticut. For how long? Victoria didn't look at him. She kept folding clothes, placing them carefully in the bag. I don't know. A while. Victoria. I can't be here, Brad. I can't look at these walls, at these photographs, at this life we built on. She stopped. Her hands trembled. I can't look at any of it. Bradford stepped closer. We'll get through this, together, like we always have. Victoria finally turned to face him. Her eyes were red, but there were no tears. She'd cried herself empty. Will we get through this? She shook her head. I've spent the last 3 days thinking about who I am, who we are, and I don't like what I see. We made mistakes. Mistakes? She laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? We destroyed people, Brad. We took their jobs, their dignity, their voices. We paid them to disappear so we could keep pretending we were good people. We didn't know. We didn't want to know. That's different. She closed the suitcase. I need time to think, to figure out who I want to be, because I don't want to be this person anymore. What person? The person who tells a man he belongs with garbage. Victoria's voice broke. The person who sees someone different and assumes the worst. The person who... She couldn't finish. Bradford reached for her hand. She pulled away. I'll call you when I'm ready, she said. Don't follow me. She walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, out the front door. Bradford heard her car start, heard the engine fade into the distance. He stood alone in their empty bedroom, in their empty house, in the ruins of their empty life. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Bradford Whitmore understood what James Carter had felt standing at that table. The loneliness of being unseen, the silence of being dismissed, the cold reality of being told you don't belong. He sank to the floor, his back against the bed, and stared at the ceiling until morning. 6 weeks passed. The bankruptcy filing made headlines for exactly 1 day before the news cycle moved on. There were always new scandals, new outrages, new villains to replace the old ones. The Whitmores, who had once commanded magazine covers and society pages, became yesterday's news. But the consequences didn't stop just because the cameras went away. Bradford sold the Westchester mansion in April. He had no choice. The mortgage payments had piled up, and with no income and mounting legal fees, keeping the house was impossible. The buyer was a tech executive from California who paid cash and didn't care about the history of the place. Moving day was a Tuesday. Bradford stood in the empty foyer, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of 30 years. The chandelier his mother had picked out. The hardwood floors his father had insisted on. The walls that had witnessed holidays and arguments and milestones now stripped bare. The movers were efficient. They didn't make small talk. They didn't ask questions. They just loaded box after box into the truck while Bradford watched his life disappear. Victoria wasn't there. She was still at her sister's place in Connecticut, still finding herself, still avoiding any conversation that lasted more than 5 minutes. They talked on the phone once a week, stilted, awkward exchanges that felt more like legal depositions than marital conversations. Where are you going to live? She'd asked during their last call. I found an apartment in Queens, 2 bedrooms. It's fine. Queens. She'd said it like it was a foreign country. Bradford Whitmore living in Queens. Bradford Whitmore doesn't have a lot of options right now. Silence. Then, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I know. More silence. Maybe I could visit. Once you're settled. Maybe. But they both knew she wouldn't. They both knew the distance between them was growing wider every day, and neither of them had the energy to bridge it. The new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days. No doorman, no elevator, no view of anything except the building next door. Bradford climbed the stairs with 2 suitcases, everything he'd kept from the old life, and unlocked the door to his new one. The place smelled like paint and old carpet. The kitchen was the size of a closet. The bedroom barely fit a queen bed. This is what you get, Bradford thought. This is what you deserve. He unpacked slowly, methodically. Clothes in the closet. Toiletries in the bathroom. A few photographs he couldn't bear to throw away. His parents, his children, a single shot of Victoria from their wedding day. He set that one face down on the dresser. That night, he ate takeout Chinese food from a container sitting on a folding chair because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. The TV was on some cable news show he wasn't really watching when a familiar face appeared on screen. James Carter. Bradford reached for the remote to change the channel, then stopped. James was being interviewed at some conference. An economic summit, the caption said. He wore a simple gray suit and spoke with the same quiet confidence Bradford remembered from the gala. Mr. Carter, your company has invested nearly $50 million in minority-led startups this year alone. What drives that focus? James smiled. Opportunity drives it. Talent doesn't care about race or gender. It exists everywhere. The question is whether we have the vision to see it and the courage to invest in it. Some critics say you're being too political. That business should be separate from social issues. Business is never separate from social issues. Every hiring decision, every investment, every promotion, those are all social decisions. The question isn't whether to be political. The question is what politics you choose to practice. Bradford turned off the TV. He sat in the darkness of his empty apartment, listening to the sounds of the city outside traffic sirens. Voices he didn't recognize. $50 million. That's what James Carter had invested in people who looked like him. $50 million in opportunity, in hope and futures that Bradford's company had spent decades denying. And Bradford, he'd spent $50 million trying to keep his company afloat, trying to cover up mistakes, trying to maintain a lifestyle built on foundations that were rotten from the start. Where had it gotten him? A 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, takeout Chinese, and a wife who couldn't stand to be in the same state as him. Bradford got up and went to bed. Sleep didn't come for a long time. The lawsuit moved forward in May. Bradford had to appear for depositions, 7 hours of questions from attorneys who treated him like a hostile witness, which he supposed he was. Mr. Whitmore, did you personally approve the termination of Maria Gonzalez? I signed off on it, yes, but I didn't know the details of her complaints at the time. You didn't know that she had reported racial slurs just 3 days before her termination. HR handled those matters. I trusted them to. Mr. Whitmore, your signature is on the settlement agreement. Your signature authorized $200,000 to Ms. Gonzalez in exchange for her silence. Are you saying you signed that document without reading it? Bradford's attorney put a hand on his arm. My client isn't required to speculate about his state of mind 3 years ago. I'm not asking him to speculate. I'm asking him to explain how he could authorize a 6-figure payout without knowing why. The questions went on like that for hours. The same pattern repeated for each plaintiff. Bradford signed things. Bradford approved things. Bradford looked the other way while his company systematically silenced people who dared to speak up. The worst part was the evidence. Emails Bradford had forgotten about, memos he barely remembered writing, decisions he'd made without thinking twice that now seemed obviously painfully wrong. One email in particular haunted him. From 2019, to the head of HR. 2. Let's wrap this up quickly. I don't want another diversity issue dragging on. Pay her what she wants and make sure the NDA is airtight. Her. Jamal Williams' case had been about a him, but Bradford had been so dismissive, so careless, that he'd gotten the gender wrong. Is this your email, Mr. Whitmore? Yes. What did you mean by another diversity issue? I meant complaints. Claims, things that could become public. So you viewed discrimination complaints as PR problems to be solved rather than workplace issues to be addressed. Bradford's attorney objected. The attorney for the plaintiff smiled. It didn't matter. The question had been asked. The answer was obvious. After the deposition, Bradford sat in his car for an hour. He didn't drive anywhere. He just sat staring at nothing, thinking about all the decisions that had led him here. He'd never considered himself a racist. He'd donated to charities. He'd hired people of color, He'd said all the right things at all the right events. But what had he actually done? What had he built? A company where 7 employees had been paid to disappear. A culture where supervisors could call their subordinates boy and face no consequences. A system where complaints were problems to be buried rather than wrongs to be addressed. "I didn't know," he said out loud to no one. "I didn't know it was that bad." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He'd known. He'd always known. He'd just chosen not to see. Seeing would have meant acting. Acting would have meant changing. And change was expensive. Change was inconvenient. Change threatened the comfortable world he'd inherited from his father, so he'd looked away. For years. Decades. His whole career. And now, he was paying the price. Victoria called that night. "How was the deposition?" "Bad." "Bad how?" "Bad like I'm starting to understand why everyone hates us." Silence on the line. "Victoria, did we ever talk about this, about how we treated people?" "What do you mean? The employees, the settlements, the complaints?" Bradford's voice cracked. "Did we ever actually talk about it? Or did we just pretend it wasn't happening?" More silence. "Then, we didn't talk about a lot of things. I know. We were too busy, I guess. Too focused on the company, the social calendar, the image." Victoria sounded tired, defeated. "We were so worried about looking like good people that we never actually tried to be good people." "Is that what you've figured out in Connecticut?" "It's one of the things." She paused. "I've been going to therapy." Therapy. 3 times a week. It was my sister's idea. Victoria laughed softly. Can you imagine Victoria Whitmore lying on a couch talking about her feelings? "What do you talk about?" "Everything. My childhood. My parents. The way I was raised to see the world." Another pause. "The way I learned to look at people who weren't like us." "And what have you learned?" "That it goes deep. Really deep. Things I never even knew were there." Her voice dropped. "I was 6 years old when my mother told me not to play with the cleaning lady's daughter. 6, and I never questioned it. Not once in my whole life until that night at the gala." Bradford thought about his own childhood, his own parents, the things they'd said and done that had seemed so normal, so natural. The country club that didn't admit black members until 1995. The jokes his father told after too much bourbon. The way his mother would clutch her purse when certain people walked by. He'd absorbed it all, like water into a sponge. And then he'd squeezed it back out every day, in every interaction. "I'm sorry," he said. He wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. Everything, maybe. "Me too." They stayed on the phone in silence for a while. It was the closest they'd been in weeks. Summer came. The lawsuit dragged on. Bradford got a job. Not a CEO position, no one would touch him for that. A consulting role at a small manufacturing firm. Entry level, really. The kind of job his assistants used to have. He took the subway to work. He ate lunch at his desk. He came home to his apartment in Queens and watched TV until he fell asleep. It was a small life. A quiet life. Unrecognizable from what he'd had before. But there were moments, brief surprising moments, when he didn't hate it. One morning, he held the subway door for an elderly woman carrying groceries. She smiled at him and said, "God bless you, young man." Young man. He was 63 years old. Another day, a coworker invited him to lunch. A woman named Deborah who'd worked at the firm for 20 years. They talked about nothing in particular, the weather, the job, a show they both liked. When they finished, she said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more entitled, I guess, given everything that happened." Bradford didn't know what to say to that, so he just said, "I'm working on it." In July, he got a letter. No return address. Just his name typed neatly on the envelope. He opened it, expecting hate mail. He'd gotten plenty of that over the past few months. But it wasn't hate mail. Dear Mr. Whitmore, you don't know me, but I worked at your company from 2017 to 2019. I was in the accounting department. I left because I couldn't take the culture anymore. The little comments, the assumptions, the feeling of being invisible. I never filed a complaint. I never asked for a settlement. I just left and tried to forget. But I saw the trial coverage. I saw the other employees coming forward. And I wanted to write to you, not to pile on, but to say something I never got to say when I worked there. You probably don't remember me. I was one of dozens of faces in meetings you barely noticed. But I remember you. I remember every time you walked past my desk without acknowledging I existed. Every time you mispronounced my name after I'd corrected you 3 times. Every time you assumed the black woman in the room was the note-taker instead of the senior analyst. Those things add up. They wear you down. They make you feel like no matter what you accomplish, you'll never really be seen. I'm writing because I believe people can change. I don't know if you will, but I hope so. For your sake, and for everyone you'll encounter for the rest of your life. See people, Mr. Whitmore. Really see them. It's not as hard as you think. The letter was unsigned. Bradford read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer. He thought about the woman who'd written it. Tried to remember faces from the accounting department. Couldn't. That was the problem, wasn't it? He couldn't remember because he'd never really looked. That night, he called Victoria. I want to apologize, he said. To me, to everyone, to the employees, to James Carter, to every person I've ever treated like they were less than. Brad, I know it won't change anything. I know it won't make up for what we did, but I have to try. Victoria was quiet for a long time. I've been thinking the same thing, she finally said. My therapist says it's part of the process. Taking accountability, making amends. How do we do that? I don't know yet, but maybe. She hesitated. Maybe we could figure it out together. It was the first hopeful thing she'd said in months. August brought the verdict. The jury found in favor of the plaintiffs on all counts. $15 million in damages, plus another $5 million in punitive awards. Bradford watched the announcement on television from his apartment. Maria Gonzalez hugged her attorney. Jamal Williams wiped tears from his eyes. David Chen stood quietly nodding, finally vindicated. This isn't about money, Maria said to the cameras. This is about being heard. This is about knowing that what happened to us wasn't okay, and finally having someone say it. The judgment would come out of the bankruptcy estate. Bradford would have to sell everything that was left: the cars, the art, the last remnants of the life he'd built. He didn't fight it, didn't appeal, didn't complain. For the first time in this whole nightmare, he felt something that surprised him. Relief. It was over. The hiding, the pretending, the desperate scrambling to save what couldn't be saved. The truth was out. The consequences had landed. And now, finally, he could stop running. He called Victoria that night. I saw the verdict, she said. Me too. How do you feel? Bradford thought about it. Really thought. Lighter, he said. I know that doesn't make sense. We just lost everything. But I feel lighter. It makes sense. Her voice was soft. I've felt that way too lately. Like I don't have to pretend anymore. Like I can finally just be whoever I actually am. Who is that? I don't know yet, but I want to find out. She paused. Brad, I've been thinking about coming back to New York. His heart jumped. Really? Not to the apartment. Not yet. But to be closer. To see if we can, I don't know, start over. I'd like that. It won't be the same. We won't be the same. I know. Bradford looked around his small apartment at the sparse furniture and bare walls. Maybe that's the point. Victoria laughed. A real laugh for the first time in months. Bradford Whitmore optimist. That's new. I'm trying. I know you are. Her voice softened. I am too. They talked for another hour, about therapy and growth and the long road ahead, about the people they'd hurt and the amends they needed to make. When they hung up, Bradford felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not for his old life. That was gone, and he was beginning to understand that it needed to be gone. But hope for something new, something different, something built on honesty instead of appearances. He looked at the letter in his drawer, the unsigned message from the woman he couldn't remember. See people, Mr. Whitmore. Really see them. Tomorrow he would go to work. He would ride the subway with strangers. He would eat lunch with Deborah and actually listen when she talked about her life. He would practice seeing. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just a start. But sometimes a start was enough. 1 year later, James Carter stood at a podium in a community center on Chicago's South Side. The building was new, freshly painted walls, gleaming floors, state-of-the-art computers in every room. A brass plaque by the entrance read, "The Sarah Carter STEM Center, in memory of a mother who believed." 200 people filled the auditorium. Students, parents, teachers, community leaders. They'd come to celebrate the center's grand opening. But really, they'd come to see James. He looked out at the crowd and felt his mother's presence everywhere. 25 years ago, he began. I learned to code in a library 6 blocks from here. The computers were 10 years old. The chairs were broken. The ceiling leaked when it rained. Laughter rippled through the audience. But none of that mattered, because someone saw me, a librarian named Mrs. Patterson. She noticed a skinny kid who came in every day after school, and instead of shooing me away, she asked what I was working on. James paused, letting the memory wash over him. That question changed my life. Not because it led to some brilliant conversation or mentorship opportunity, but because it told me I existed. It told me someone cared enough to notice. He looked at the young faces in the front rows. Kids who reminded him of himself at that age. Hungry, curious, desperate for someone to see them. This center isn't about computers. It's not about coding or robotics or any of the fancy equipment you'll find in these rooms. It's about that question. It's about adults who take the time to ask, what are you working on? What do you dream about? Who do you want to become? A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. A teenager next to her sat up straighter. I've been asked a lot over the past year about what happened at a charity gala in Manhattan, about a viral video, about justice and revenge and accountability. The room went quiet. Here's what I want you to know. That moment, as painful as it was, reminded me why this work matters. It reminded me that dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you're born with. And it's something that can be stripped away in an instant by people who refuse to see you. James stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage. But it can also be restored by teachers who believe in you, by communities that invest in you, by strangers who take the time to ask your name and remember it. He smiled. That's what we're building here. Not a building, a promise. A promise that every kid who walks through those doors will be seen. The applause started slowly and built into something thunderous. People stood. Some cried. James shook hands for an hour afterward, talking to every parent who wanted a moment, every student who wanted to share a dream. When the crowd finally thinned, Sarah found him near the exit. "There's someone here to see you," she said. Her voice was strange, cautious. "Who?" "Bradford Whitmore." James went still. He hadn't heard that name in months. Hadn't thought about the Whitmores except in passing when reporters asked about that night, or when he saw their names in business articles about corporate accountability. What does he want? He didn't say, just asked if you had a few minutes. Sarah crossed her arms. "I can tell him to leave." James considered it. A year ago he might have said yes, but a year was a long time, long enough to wonder what became of people after their world collapsed. Send him in. Bradford Whitmore looked different. Older, thinner. His suit was off the rack, his watch was gone, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something humbled. He stopped a few feet from James like he wasn't sure he was allowed to come closer. Mr. Carter, thank you for seeing me. Mr. Whitmore. James kept his voice neutral. I'm surprised you're here. I wasn't sure I should come. I've written about a dozen letters over the past year trying to figure out what to say. I threw them all away. Why? Because nothing I wrote seemed adequate. Every apology felt hollow. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. Bradford looked down at his hands. So I decided to just show up. To say it in person, even if you don't want to hear it. James crossed his arms. I'm listening. Bradford took a breath. The kind of breath you take before jumping off a cliff. I'm sorry. For what I said that night. For what my wife said. For the way we treated you. And for the years of treating other people the same way when no one was watching. That's a lot to be sorry for. I know. Bradford's voice cracked slightly. And I know an apology doesn't fix anything. It doesn't give Maria Gonzalez back the years she lost. It doesn't undo what happened to Jamal Williams or David Chen. It doesn't erase the video or the pain or any of it. Then why are you here? Because I needed you to know that I understand now, not just intellectually really understand. Bradford looked up, meeting James's eyes for the first time. I've spent the last year losing everything I thought mattered. My company, my money, my status, my friends. He paused. My marriage is barely surviving. My children won't return my calls. I'm working an entry-level job and living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. James said nothing. And here's the thing. Bradford's voice steadied. I deserved all of it. Every consequence. Every loss. I spent my whole life believing I was better than other people because of my name, my family, my money. I looked at someone like you and saw a threat instead of a person. What do you see now? Bradford was quiet for a long moment. A man who built something real. Something that matters. A man who could have destroyed me really destroyed me, and instead used his platform to help people who'd been hurt by people like me. He gestured toward the auditorium, toward the building they stood in. I came here today because I read about this center, I saw what you're doing, and I realized that while I was crying about my lost fortune, you were building futures for kids who never had one. James uncrossed his arms. Some of the tension left his shoulders. What do you want, Mr. Whitmore? Forgiveness, absolution. No. Bradford shook his head. I'm not asking for anything. I don't deserve anything. I just wanted to tell you face to face that you changed me. That night, as horrible as it was, woke me up. And I'm trying, really trying to become someone different. Are you succeeding? I don't know. Some days I think so. Other days I catch myself thinking the old thoughts, making the old assumptions. It's like a disease I'm recovering from. The symptoms come back when I least expect them. James studied him. The man in front of him wasn't the Bradford Whitmore from the gala. That man had been polished, confident, dripping with entitlement. This man was broken, humbled, human. My mother used to say something, James said slowly. She said hate is a poison that kills the person who drinks it. Bradford nodded. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, and if she were here she'd tell me that holding on to anger at you isn't hurting you. It's hurting me. I wouldn't blame you if you hated me forever. I don't hate you, Mr. Whitmore. James surprised himself by meaning it. I did for a while, after the gala, after I found out about the employees. After I saw the depths of what your company had been doing for years. And now I feel something closer to sadness. For you, for your wife, for everyone who goes through life the way you did, never really seeing the people around them. Bradford's eyes glistened. That's more grace than I deserve. Probably. James allowed himself a small smile. But grace isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to give it anyway. They stood in silence for a moment. Two men who'd been enemies finding some fragile common ground. "What will you do now?" James asked. "Keep working. Keep going to therapy. Keep trying to be better." Bradford paused. "Victoria and I have been talking about starting a foundation, something for workplace discrimination victims. Legal support counseling, help finding new jobs." "That's ambitious. We don't have much money, but we have time, and we have experience, not good experience, but relevant experience. We know what it looks like when a company sweeps this stuff under the rug. Maybe we can help people fight it." James considered this. A year ago, he would have dismissed it as a PR stunt. But looking at Bradford now, he believed it might be genuine. "If you're serious," James said, "I know some people you should talk to. Organizations that do this work. They might be willing to advise you." Bradford looked stunned. "You'd do that after everything." "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the people you might actually help." James reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Call my office tomorrow. Sarah will connect you." Bradford took the card like it was made of gold. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just do the work." Bradford nodded. He started to leave, then turned back. "Mr. Carter, that question you asked on stage, about whether adults take the time to see kids to ask them what they're working on. Yes. No one ever asked me that when I was young. My father told me what to work on. My mother told me who to be. I was 40 years old before I realized I'd never made a single choice that was actually mine." James didn't respond. He just waited. "That's not an excuse," Bradford continued. "It's just, I'm starting to understand that the way I treated people wasn't just about prejudice. It was about fear. Fear that if I really looked at someone different from me, I'd have to question everything I'd been taught, everything I believed about who deserved what. And now I question everything." Bradford smiled small and sad. "It's terrifying, but it's also the first honest thing I've done in 60 years. He left without another word. James watched him go, then turned back to the empty auditorium. Sarah appeared at his elbow. "What was that about? Redemption, maybe, or the beginning of it?" "Do you believe him?" James thought about it. "I believe he wants to change. Whether he actually will." He shrugged. "That's not up to me. That's his work to do." "You gave him your card." "I gave him a chance. What he does with it is his business." Sarah shook her head. "You're a better person than I am." "No, I'm just tired of carrying anger." James looked at the brass plaque on the wall. His mother's name, her legacy. She would have wanted me to let it go. Not for him. For me. 3 months later, Victoria Whitmore took the subway for the first time in her life. It wasn't intentional. Her car had broken down the used Honda she'd bought after selling the last of her jewelry, and she had a meeting downtown that couldn't wait. So she'd walked to the station, bought a Metro card, and descended into a world she'd spent 60 years avoiding. The platform was crowded. Rush hour. People pressed together waiting for the train. Victoria found herself standing next to a young woman with 2 children, both under 5, both wearing backpacks that looked too heavy for their small frames. "Is it always this crowded?" Victoria asked. The woman looked at her suspicious at first, then curious. "First time? Is it that obvious?" "A little." The woman smiled. "You get used to it. Stand near the door. Keep your bag in front of you and don't make eye contact with anyone playing music too loud." Victoria laughed. It felt strange laughing with a stranger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd done that. The train arrived. They squeezed in together, grabbing the same pole for balance. The children sat on their mother's lap, playing some game with their fingers. "They're beautiful," Victoria said. "How old?" 4 and 2. Terrors, both of them. But the woman's voice was warm, proud. Going to daycare while I work. Then I pick them up at 5, we do homework, dinner, bath, bed. Start all over the next day. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's mine, you know. This life I'm building for them. Every sacrifice means something. Victoria looked at the children, at their mother, at the determination in her eyes. A year ago, she wouldn't have noticed any of them. She would have been in the back of a town car scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the millions of people living lives just as real and important as hers. I admire you, Victoria said. The words came out before she could stop them. What you're doing. It takes strength I never had to develop. The woman studied her for a moment. Everybody's got their own struggles. You don't know mine, I don't know yours. But we're all on the same train, right? Going somewhere, hoping we get there. The train stopped. The woman gathered her children and moved toward the door. This is us. Good luck with wherever you're going. Thank you. Victoria meant it more than she could say. Good luck to you too. She watched them disappear onto the platform, swallowed by the crowd. The train moved on. Victoria held the pole and looked at the faces around her. A businessman checking his phone. A teenager with headphones. An elderly man reading a newspaper. A woman in scrubs, probably just off a hospital shift. People. Just people. Living their lives. How had she gone 60 years without really seeing them? The foundation officially launched in December. They called it Second Chances. Victoria and Bradford ran it together, their first collaboration since the marriage had nearly collapsed. They started small. A hotline for workers facing discrimination. A legal fund for people who couldn't afford attorneys. A support group that met every Thursday in a church basement. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the world they'd come from. But it was real. Maria Gonzalez came to speak at their first community event. Victoria had been terrified to face her, this woman whose life had been upended by their company, their culture, their willful blindness. But Maria had agreed to come. And when she took the microphone, she didn't talk about anger or revenge. I spent 3 years being ashamed, Maria said. Ashamed that I'd complained. Ashamed that I'd been fired. Ashamed that I'd taken money to stay quiet. The room was silent. 40 people, most of them current or former victims of workplace discrimination, leaning forward in their folding chairs. But shame is a cage, and the people who put us there, they never feel it. They move on with their lives while we're still locked up. Maria looked at Victoria, not with hatred, not with forgiveness exactly, with something more complicated. When the Whitmores reached out about this foundation, I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell them where they could shove their second chances. She paused. But then I realized that would be giving them power over me again, letting my anger decide my actions. Victoria felt tears on her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. So I'm here, not to forgive, not to forget, but to use what happened to me and what happened to them to help people who are going through it right now. Maria straightened her shoulders. That's what healing looks like, not pretending the wound doesn't exist, but turning the scar into something useful. After the event, Maria approached Victoria. You came, Victoria said. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't think you would. Neither did I. Maria's expression was unreadable. But I've learned that people can surprise you, even people you've written off. I'm so sorry. For everything. For what we did to you, for what I said that night, for... Stop. Maria held up a hand. I've heard your apologies. I've read your letters. I know you're sorry. Do you believe me? Maria took a long time to answer. I believe you're trying, and right now that's enough. She walked away, leaving Victoria standing alone in the emptying room. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A crack in the wall. A beginning. Spring came. The first anniversary of the verdict. James Carter was in his office when his assistant buzzed him. There's a package for you. Hand-delivered. No return address. Open it. He heard paper rustling, then silence. What is it? I think you should see this yourself. James walked to the outer office. On his assistant's desk sat a small wooden box. Inside, resting on velvet, was a watch. A Patek Philippe. The kind that cost more than most people's annual salary. There was a note underneath. Mr. Carter, this watch belonged to my grandfather. He wore it when he founded the company I destroyed. It's the last valuable thing I owned. I want you to have it not as a gift, but as a symbol. A reminder that legacies can be built or broken. That what we inherit is less important than what we do with it. I'm trying to build something new. Something better. This watch represents the old way. I don't want it anymore. Use it however you see fit. Sell it. Donate the proceeds, throw it in the river. It's yours now. With respect, Bradford Whitmore. James held the watch for a long time, felt its weight in his palm. Then he picked up the phone and called his foundation coordinator. I'm donating a watch to the scholarship fund. Should bring about $50,000 at auction. That's generous. Where did it come from? James looked at the note one more time. From someone trying to change his legacy. He hung up the phone and looked out at the city. The same skyline he'd watched the night of the gala. The same buildings, the same streets, the same endless river of humanity flowing below. A year ago, he'd stood at a table and been told he didn't belong. Now 50 new students would go to college because of that moment. 7 employees had found justice. A community center bore his mother's name. A foundation was helping people fight discrimination. And 2 people who'd treated him like garbage were slowly, painfully becoming something different. Was it justice? Was it redemption? Was it revenge? Maybe it was all 3. Maybe the categories didn't matter. What mattered was this. Something had changed, not just for him or the Whitmores, but for everyone who'd watched that video. Read those headlines followed the story. People were talking about things they'd been afraid to say out loud. Companies were reviewing their policies. Employees were reporting misconduct instead of suffering in silence. One moment of cruelty had become a catalyst for something larger. Something that might actually make a difference. James thought about his mother again. Her tired eyes after long nights of cleaning. Her proud smile at his graduation. Her voice always gentle, always certain. See the person, Jamie, not the job, not the money, the person. He'd tried to live by those words. Sometimes he'd succeeded. Sometimes he'd failed. But today, looking at the watch that would fund futures for kids like the one he'd been, he felt closer to her than ever. I'm trying, Mama, he said to the empty room. I'm trying. That evening, James gave a speech at a business conference. The topic was leadership, but everyone knew what they really wanted him to talk about. He didn't disappoint. A year ago, I was told I didn't belong in a room I'd paid to be in. 2 people looked at me and saw everything they'd been taught to fear: my skin, my presence, my existence, in a space they considered theirs. The audience was silent. 3,000 executives, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders hanging on every word. I could have responded with anger. I could have responded with violence. I could have used my resources to crush them completely. He paused. I chose accountability instead. Not revenge accountability. There's a difference. Revenge is about making someone suffer. Accountability is about making them see. He walked across the stage, his voice filling the room. The Whitmores are starting a foundation now, helping people who've faced discrimination. I don't know if they'll succeed. I don't know if their hearts have truly changed, or if this is just another performance. He shrugged. But I gave them a chance, because that's what I would have wanted if our positions were reversed. A murmur went through the crowd. Some of you think I'm naive. Some of you think I'm weak. Some of you are wondering why I didn't bury them completely when I had the chance. He smiled. Here's why. because burying them wouldn't have changed anything. It would have felt good for a moment, and then I would have been just like them, using my power to destroy instead of build. James looked out at the sea of faces. Every person in this room has power. The power to hire and fire, to promote and demote, to see people or look through them. How you use that power defines who you are, not your net worth, not your title, not your family name. He thought of his mother one last time. See the person. That's all I ask. When someone walks into your office, your store, your event, see them. Not their clothes, not their accent, not the assumptions you've been taught to make. See the human being standing in front of you. The applause started before he finished. It built into something thunderous, washing over him like a wave. But James barely heard it. He was thinking about a night 1 year ago when he'd stood in front of a table that belonged to him and been told to find the garbage. That night had changed everything. And now, standing in front of 3,000 people who were finally listening, James understood something he hadn't understood before. The moment that was meant to destroy him had made him visible. Not just to the world, but to himself. It had shown him what he was capable of, not destruction, but construction. Not revenge, but redemption. Not hate, but hope. He stepped away from the podium and walked off the stage. In the audience, a young black woman in a cheap suit held her phone recording. She'd come to this conference on a scholarship, one of James's scholarships, and she was crying. Next to her, an older white man sat in stunned silence. He was a CEO. He'd been one for 30 years. And he was thinking about every person he'd overlooked, every assumption he'd made, every time he'd looked at someone and decided they didn't belong. In a small apartment in Queens, Bradford, Whitmore watched the speech on television. Victoria sat beside him holding his hand. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They were watching a man they'd tried to destroy become something greater than they'd ever been. And for the first time, instead of envy or resentment, they felt something else. Gratitude. Because James Carter had shown them what they could become if they had the courage to change. He'd given them a chance they didn't deserve. And now it was up to them to prove worthy of it. Bradford squeezed Victoria's hand. "Are we going to be okay?" she whispered. He thought about the journey ahead. The work they still had to do. The people they still needed to become. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But we're going to try." That night, James Carter went home to an empty apartment. He made himself dinner. He read a book. He went to bed early. No cameras, no applause, no spotlight. Just a man who'd been told he didn't belong, living a life he'd built with his own hands. And that was enough. Because dignity isn't about what other people see when they look at you. It's about what you see when you look at yourself. James knew exactly who he was. And no one could ever take that away.